Snow was falling hard over Black Pine Ridge when Ethan Ward saw the truck pull away. Behind it, an old German shepherd stumbled across the icy road, too weak to run, but too loyal to stop. His muzzle was silver, his legs were shaking, and his collar carried 5 words. Rusty, 19 years together. Ethan thought he was saving a dog abandoned in the storm, but Rusty was not trying to find a new home. He was trying to lead someone back to the man everyone had quietly forgotten. Tell us where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. Black Pine Ridge looked almost gentle from a distance in winter. Snow softened the roofs of the town, rounded the shoulders of parked trucks, and turned every fence rail into a pale white line drawn against the dark pines. Smoke lifted from chimneys in slow blue ribbons. The mountains stood around the valley like old witnesses, their ridges wrapped in cloud, their forests black and still beneath the weight of ice. But Ethan Ward knew better than to trust softness. At 52, Ethan had learned that winter did not announce its cruelty. It did not always arrive with a roar. Sometimes it came as a bright road that looked dry until the tires lost their grip. Sometimes it came as a beautiful white field hiding a ditch deep enough to swallow a man. Sometimes it came as silence after a voice should have answered. His cabin sat near the edge of the tree line, where the last gravel road thinned into forest, and the wind sounded different after dark. The place had been built before Ethan was born, with rough cedar walls, a stone chimney, and a porch that leaned slightly toward the valley as if it were tired of standing but too stubborn to fall. Stubborn things had always made sense to Ethan. He kept the cabin in working order with his own hands. Firewood stacked by length under the shed roof, snow shovel by the porch rail, rifle locked above the pantry, medical kit beneath the sink, generator checked every Friday whether it needed checking or not. His boots were always placed with the toes facing the door. His truck always had a full tank before a storm. People in Black Pine Ridge knew pieces of him and filled the rest with guesses. They knew he had been a Navy SEAL. They knew he had come home years ago with a quiet wife named Elise, who had laughed too brightly for such a cold town and planted marigolds in coffee cans along the porch steps. They knew Elise had died one November after an illness that had made the cabin windows glow late into the night. They knew Ethan had not planted anything since. Some knew about Ranger, though not enough to say the name with any weight. Ranger had been a working dog, black and tan, all nerve and devotion, with one chipped canine and a habit of resting his head against Ethan's knee before every mission as if asking whether the world was worth entering again. Ethan had brought many men home. He had brought Ranger home in stories only. That was the part he did not speak of. By the time the storm rolled across Black Pine Ridge that afternoon, Ethan had spent the morning repairing a split board on the back steps and pretending the ache in his left shoulder was only weather. The sky had been clear at breakfast. By noon, the clouds had dropped low enough to scrape the tops of the pines. By 3, the first snow began moving sideways. He should have stayed home. Instead, he drove into town for lamp oil, chain lubricant, and a sack of dog food he did not need. He had no dog. That was the kind of foolishness he allowed himself once in a while. Buying things for emergencies that had not happened yet. Preparing for lives that would not arrive. It looked like discipline from the outside. Ethan knew it was something closer to grief with shelves. The road out of town climbed north before bending toward Bennett Valley. Most folks avoided that stretch in bad weather. The curves came too sharp, the guardrails too low, and the wind had a way of sweeping loose snow across the asphalt in pale, ghostly sheets. Ethan drove slowly, both hands steady on the wheel. His hair, longer than any commander would have tolerated, brushed his brow when the heater pushed warm air through the cab. Dark brown, streaked with silver near the temples, it had gone wild in the damp. He wore his old olive combat shirt beneath a charcoal winter coat, the camouflage sleeves hidden except at the wrists. It was not a uniform anymore. It was just what his body trusted when the world grew uncertain. The storm thickened near the Bennett turnoff. At first, Ethan saw only taillights. 2 red dots slid through the blowing snow ahead, low and uneven, as if the vehicle had just come off a rough road. A dark pickup pulled out from the narrow lane that led down toward the old Bennett fields. It did not stop at the main road. It swung wide, tires spitting slush, and straightened too fast for the conditions. Ethan eased his foot off the gas. There was something wrong in the way the truck moved. Not panic exactly, more like urgency wearing a borrowed coat. As it passed the open stretch between 2 stands of pine, the wind lifted the curtain of snow for half a second. Ethan caught a glimpse of the driver's side door. No face, no plate he could read. Just a smear of white across dark paint, and beneath it, a half-buried logo. Sloan Ridge Development. The name meant little to Ethan beyond town talk. New resort plans, land options, men in clean boots pointing at maps, promises about jobs, tax revenue, and bringing Black Pine Ridge into the future, whether Black Pine Ridge had asked to go there or not. The pickup disappeared into the storm. Then Ethan saw what followed it. At first, his mind refused to understand the shape in the road. A dark body against white snow, low and struggling, moving where nothing should have been moving. Then the shape stumbled, caught itself, and lifted its head. A dog. An old German shepherd. The animal was trying to follow the truck, not running, not truly. No young strength powered those steps. The dog's back end wavered badly, hips loose with age, paws sliding on the ice. Its coat, once black and gold, had gone pale around the muzzle and smoky across the shoulders. Snow clung to its face, its ears, its thin chest. One ear stood at a tired angle. The other dipped as if the storm itself had pressed it down. The dog let out a sound that made Ethan's hands tighten on the wheel. It was not a bark. It was not even a howl in the clean, wild way wolves gave their sorrow to the moon. It was a broken, pleading cry, torn out of a body that had spent too many years believing footsteps would always come back. The old shepherd slipped. Its front legs folded first. Then the rear legs went sideways, and the dog hit the road with a dull, helpless skid. For a moment it lay there, chest heaving, snow blowing over its body. Ethan braked before deciding too. The truck stopped at an angle across the lane. He threw it into park, stepped out into the storm, and the cold struck him full in the face. Wind shoved snow beneath his collar. The road hummed faintly under the weather. Somewhere beyond the bend, the dark pickup was already gone. The dog tried to rise again. "Easy," Ethan said. His voice came out lower than he expected. Rusted from disuse, maybe, or from memory. The shepherd turned its head toward him. Its eyes were brown, clouded with age, but not empty. Fear moved through them first, then confusion, then a desperate hope so raw Ethan almost looked away. The dog was looking past him, toward the road, toward the place the truck had vanished. "Easy," Ethan said again, softer this time. The shepherd pushed its front legs under itself. The rear legs trembled, failed, tried again. The animal made it halfway up, then sank back with a thin whine that vanished into the wind. Ethan crouched several feet away, giving it space. He had approached frightened dogs in worse places than Montana roads. He knew not to crowd pain, knew not to mistake helplessness for surrender. An animal could be half frozen and still bite if the world had just betrayed it badly enough. But this old dog did not bare its teeth. It only stared down the road with such ancient loyalty that Ethan felt something inside him shift, like ice cracking on a lake no one had walked across in years. Ranger had looked back once. That was the memory Ethan never invited and never managed to keep out. A flash of dust, a command swallowed by noise, Ranger turning his head, one ear high, eyes locked on Ethan for the smallest fraction of time. Not accusing. That would have been easier. Trusting. Trust was the cruelest thing to remember. The shepherd in the snow made another attempt to stand. "No," Ethan murmured. "You've done enough." The dog's eyes flicked to him then, old, wet, proud in a ruined way. Ethan took off one glove and held out his bare hand, palm down, letting the dog smell skin instead of leather. The cold bit his fingers almost instantly. The shepherd sniffed once. Then, with heartbreaking effort, it leaned forward and touched its nose to his knuckles. Permission, maybe. Or exhaustion pretending to be permission. Ethan moved slowly. He slid one arm beneath the dog's chest and the other under its hips. The shepherd tensed, a weak tremor passing through its frame, but did not fight. When Ethan lifted, he felt how light the dog was beneath the soaked coat. Too light. All bone, wet fur, stubborn breath. The dog gave one hoarse cry toward the empty road. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second. "I know," he said, though he did not know enough yet. Not the name, not the owner, not the story. Only the shape of abandonment. Only the sound love made when it was left behind in a storm. He carried the dog to the truck and laid it across the back seat on an old wool blanket. The shepherd tried once to lift its head toward the window. Failed. Tried again. "Don't," Ethan said, but the dog did. Its cloudy eyes searched the white world beyond the glass. Ethan shut the door, went around to the driver's side, and sat for a moment without starting the engine. Snow gathered on the windshield, blurring the road, the trees, the place where the pickup had gone. Only then did he notice the collar. Old brown leather, cracked along the edges, darkened by years of oil, weather, and hands. A small metal plate hung beneath the dog's throat, scratched, nearly dull. Ethan reached back carefully and turned it toward the weak gray light. The letters were worn, but readable. Rusty. Beneath the name, in smaller engraving, was a line that made the cab feel suddenly too small. 19 years together. Ethan stared at it. 19 years. Not a stray then. Not some dog that had wandered from a yard. Not a nameless old animal slipping through the cracks of a hard winter. 19 years meant birthdays and vet bills, muddy paw prints, morning routines, a bowl in the same corner, a body sleeping near the bed, 1,000 ordinary days that became sacred only when someone tried to erase them. Behind him, Rusty made a low sound in his throat. Ethan looked into the rearview mirror. The old shepherd was still facing the road. "Who did that to you?" Ethan asked. The dog did not answer. Of course it did not. But its eyes stayed fixed on the white bend until the storm swallowed everything. Ethan turned the truck around. The drive back to the cabin took longer than it should have. He kept the heater high, one eye on the road and the other on the mirror. Rusty did not sleep. His body sagged into the blanket, but his head remained angled toward the rear window as if loyalty itself had tied a string to the vanished truck. Twice Ethan thought the dog had stopped breathing. Twice he nearly pulled over. Twice Rusty's ribs rose again, small and stubborn beneath wet fur. At the cabin, Ethan parked close to the porch and left the engine running long enough to warm the house with the thought of getting inside quickly. He carried Rusty through the front door, kicking it shut behind him against the wind. The cabin smelled of cedar smoke, old coffee, and wool. The fire in the stone hearth had burned low, but coals still glowed under ash. Ethan laid Rusty on a thick blanket near the hearth, not too close to the heat. He fetched towels from the mudroom and began drying him in slow, careful strokes. Rusty endured it. That was the word. Not accepted, not enjoyed, endured. His eyes moved from Ethan's hands to the door, then to the nearest window. "You're safe," Ethan said. The sentence sounded strange in the cabin. He had not said it to anyone in years. Rusty's ears twitched, but his gaze did not soften. Ethan warmed a little broth, mixed it with soft food, and set the bowl near the blanket. Rusty sniffed it once, took 2 tired bites, then turned his head away. "Stubborn old king," Ethan muttered. It should have been funny. Almost was. The wind rose outside, shaking snow loose from the porch roof. Rusty jerked at the sound, front paws scraping against the floor as he tried to stand. His rear legs failed beneath him. He tried again. Failed again. Ethan crossed the room and crouched beside him. "No truck," he said quietly. "Just wind." Rusty stared at the door. There was no understanding in him that the truck would not come back. Or maybe there was understanding, and he refused it. Ethan could not tell which was worse. He brought another blanket and tucked it around the dog's body. Rusty let him, but the moment Ethan stepped away, the old shepherd dragged himself half a foot toward the window. Not far, barely enough to matter. Except it mattered completely. Ethan stood there, looking down at the trail of damp fur left on the floorboards. Outside, the storm moved over Black Pine Ridge with a voice like the mountains grinding their teeth. Inside, the cabin held its small circle of firelight. A man who had spent years keeping his life narrow stood beside an old dog who had just had his whole world driven away from him. Ethan wanted to tell himself this was simple. A dog in danger, a storm, a night of shelter. In the morning, he could call the sheriff's office, or the vet, or whoever handled abandoned animals when the world behaved as if love came with disposal instructions. But Rusty lifted his head then, not toward Ethan, toward the window. His body trembled with effort, his cloudy eyes fixed on the dark road beyond the glass. A faint whine rose in his throat, so thin it barely survived the room. Ethan followed his gaze. There was nothing outside but snow and trees and the long black ribbon of road disappearing toward Bennett Valley. Still, Rusty watched, not like a dog waiting to be rescued, like a dog trying to go back. Ethan felt the old ache in his chest move, not sharp this time, but deep, a buried thing turning over in the frozen ground. He looked at the collar again. Rusty, 19 years together. Then he looked at the road, and for the first time that day, Ethan understood that he had not brought home a stray. He had brought home a promise someone had tried to leave in the snow. By morning, the storm had spent most of its anger. It left Black Pine Ridge under a clean white silence, the kind that made every sound seem guilty for existing. Snow clung to the porch rail of Ethan Ward's cabin. The pines beyond the clearing bowed under their bright burden, and the road below showed only one set of tire tracks, half filled already by wind-blown powder. Rusty had not slept much. Neither had Ethan. The old German shepherd lay near the hearth where Ethan had placed him the night before, wrapped in 2 wool blankets and 1 towel that still smelled faintly of cedar smoke. His body had finally stopped shivering sometime before dawn, but his mind had not followed. Every time the cabin settled or the stovepipe clicked, Rusty lifted his head. Every time the wind moved against the window, he stared toward the road. Ethan had seen watchfulness before. Men waiting for orders, dogs listening for movement beyond wire, grief trying to pretend it was discipline. This was different. Rusty was not guarding the cabin. He was refusing to belong to it. At 6:30, Ethan warmed broth again and coaxed the dog into eating a few careful mouthfuls. Rusty accepted the food as if politeness required it, not hunger. Afterward, he turned his face back toward the window, where pale daylight was gathering over the snow. "You're going to make this difficult," Ethan said. Rusty's left ear twitched, the one that folded when he was tired. "Yeah," Ethan muttered. "That sounds about right." He called the veterinary clinic as soon as the roads were passable. Dr. Naomi Pierce answered on the 4th ring, her voice brisk and awake in a way Ethan distrusted in anyone before coffee. "Pierce Veterinary." "It's Ethan Ward." A pause. Not alarm exactly. Recognition settling into its boots. "Ethan," she said, "if this is about your generator, you've called the wrong woman. It's a dog." The humor left her voice without drama. "Injured?" "Old cold exposure last night. Weak hind legs." "He ate a little. Breathing steady, but I don't like the way he's moving." "Can you bring him in?" "I can." Another pause, this one softer. "What kind of dog?" Ethan looked toward the hearth. Rusty's cloudy brown eyes were still fixed on the window. "German Shepherd." Naomi did not answer right away. Then she said, "I'll clear the first half hour." The clinic sat beside the feed store on the north side of town, a narrow brick building with green trim and a bell above the door that sounded too cheerful for winter. Ethan carried Rusty in wrapped in the same blanket, though the old dog protested once with a low rumble when they passed the truck. The sound did not have much force behind it. Pride, Ethan thought, survived in animals long after strength had packed its bags. The waiting room smelled of clean towels, coffee, disinfectant, and the faint dusty sweetness of kibble. A bulletin board near the door held notices for missing barn cats, discount dental cleanings, and a flyer for the Black Pine Ridge Winter Heritage Committee, featuring a smiling photo of Derek Sloan shaking hands with a county commissioner. Ethan looked away from it. Naomi came out from the exam room before the receptionist could stand. She was in her late 50s, compact and steady, with silver brown hair cut to her chin and reading glasses hanging from a cord around her neck. Her blue slate clinic coat had a pen tucked behind one ear and a smear of something that looked like iodine near the pocket. She had the calm hands of a woman who had delivered calves in sleet, set broken paws, and told more than one grown rancher the truth when he wanted comfort instead. When she saw Rusty, she stopped. Not long, only enough for Ethan to notice. "Well," she said quietly. "Hello, old man." Rusty raised his head. Naomi's face changed. Not surprise exactly. More like an old page opening to a marked place. "You know him," Ethan said. "I do." She stepped closer slowly and let Rusty smell the back of her fingers. The old dog sniffed once, then lowered his muzzle again, tired but not afraid. "This is Rusty Bennett," Naomi said. The name entered the room and made it smaller. Ethan glanced at the collar, though he already knew half of it. "Bennett, Walter Bennett's dog." Naomi looked up at Ethan. "Where did you find him?" "Bennett Valley Road, yesterday afternoon, in the storm." Naomi's mouth tightened. Ethan watched her file that away. She did not ask the wrong question. She did not say, "Why was he out there?" or "Are you sure?" She only nodded once and opened the exam room door. "Bring him in." The exam took longer than Rusty preferred and shorter than Naomi wanted. Ethan lifted him onto the padded table, and Rusty endured the indignity with the grave displeasure of an elderly judge forced to attend a circus. He disliked the thermometer, tolerated the stethoscope, and looked personally betrayed when Naomi checked the range of motion in his hips. "Arthritis," she said. "Advanced. No surprise at his age. Rear weakness, muscle wasting, heart murmur, but I've heard it before." She listened again, brow slightly furrowed. "He's dehydrated, but not dangerously. Cold stress, exhaustion, a few scrapes from ice or road gravel, nothing broken that I can feel." Ethan stood at the end of the table, one hand near Rusty's shoulder. He had not meant to keep it there. It had simply stayed. "He was cared for," Naomi said. Ethan looked at her. She lifted one of Rusty's front paws gently. Nails were trimmed recently, not perfectly, but by someone who knew he couldn't stand long. Coat's rough now from the storm, but he's been brushed. Teeth are old, obviously, but not neglected. He's been on joint medication. I prescribed it. "To Walter Bennett." "Yes." What kind of man leaves a dog like this on a mountain road? Naomi did not answer quickly. Outside the exam room window, snow slid from the edge of the feed store roof and landed with a soft collapse. Rusty flinched. Ethan felt the movement beneath his palm. "Walter wouldn't," Naomi said at last. The words were plain. No decoration. That made them heavier. Naomi opened a file cabinet and drew out a folder thick with years. Some clinics had gone fully digital. Naomi kept paper records too because, as she once told a rancher who complained about it, computers were wonderful until they met rural Wi-Fi and thunder. She laid the file on the counter. Rusty Bennett. Vaccinations. Blood work. Arthritis checkups. Notes written in Naomi's compact script. Ethan saw one line near the top of a page. Owner asks about pain level before price. Naomi noticed him reading it. That was Walter. She turned a page. He brought Rusty in every spring and every fall, sometimes more when winter was hard. Paid in cash. Exact amount, usually in an envelope with the dog's name written on it. He'd ask if Rusty could still enjoy walking the south fence, ask if the stairs were hurting him, ask whether a dog could get tired of being old. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him the truth." Naomi closed the folder gently. "That old isn't the same as done." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rusty shifted his head. His nose pointed not toward Naomi, not toward Ethan, but toward the outer wall, as if the room itself were in the way of where he needed to be. Naomi saw it too. "He's looking for Walter," she said. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Where is Walter?" "In town, people say he sold the farm and moved into long-term care." "People say a lot." "They do." "Do you know where?" Naomi looked toward the bulletin board visible through the half-open exam room door. The flyer with Derek Sloan's polished smile sat there like an answer no one had asked for. "I know what I heard," she said. "And I know what Walter told me 6 weeks ago." Ethan waited. Naomi's voice lowered. "He said Derek Sloan had been coming by, talking about land options, winter access, future development. Walter said the man could make a fence post feel underdressed." Despite himself, Ethan almost smiled. "Walter wasn't selling?" "He laughed when I asked. Said Marjorie would climb out of the grave and chase him with a skillet if he sold the field where she planted aspens." Rusty's ear lifted at the name. "Marjorie?" The change was small, but it passed through the room like a match struck in the dark. Rusty raised his head, cloudy eyes suddenly sharper. His old chest moved faster. He looked from Naomi to Ethan, then toward the door. Ethan felt every practical explanation inside him step back. Naomi did not smile. Her face softened instead, and that was worse. "Walter's wife," she said. "Gone almost 9 years. He buried her on the south rise of the farm, beneath a quaking aspen. Rusty used to lie beside the fence while Walter cleared snow from the path." Rusty made a sound then, not the broken cry from the road. Smaller. A breath pulled through memory. Ethan looked down at the old dog and understood something he did not want to understand. Rusty was not confused because he had forgotten where home was. He was hurting because he remembered too well. Naomi gave Rusty fluids under the skin, sent medication for pain, and wrapped the scrapes on his front legs. She wrote instructions on a yellow sheet and handed them to Ethan with the sternness of a schoolteacher handing a homework to a boy known for fighting in the hallway. Warmth, small meals, rest, no stairs, no long walking. If he refuses water, call me. If his breathing changes, call me. If he collapses, bring him in. "I know how to watch a dog." "I know you do." Naomi's gaze stayed on him a second longer. "I'm telling you anyway." Ethan folded the paper once and put it in his coat pocket. At the door, Naomi stopped him. "Ethan?" He turned with Rusty bundled in his arms. Walter loved that dog. Ethan looked at her. Naomi's voice did not rise. It did not need to. Whatever you find out, start there. The town had begun moving by the time Ethan stepped outside. Black Pine Ridge, after a storm, had the look of a place putting itself back into order, one shovel width at a time. Men scraped windshields with gloved hands. A woman in a red parka salted the steps of the pharmacy. The bakery windows glowed amber through frost. It was beautiful in the way small towns could be beautiful when seen from a safe distance. Ethan carried Rusty to the truck and settled him on the blanket across the back seat. The old shepherd turned his head toward the street, watching people pass with tired suspicion. "You want answers," Ethan said. "So do I." Rusty blinked slowly. Ethan drove 2 blocks to Larkin's Market. The bell over the door rang when he entered, and warmth wrapped around him with the smell of coffee, onions, floor wax, and oranges stacked in a wooden crate near the register. Larkin's had been in town longer than Ethan had been alive. It sold groceries, gossip, hunting licenses, sympathy cards, and, during storms, the illusion that everyone was still connected to everyone else. Maeve Larkin stood behind the counter in a green sweater, reading glasses low on her nose, her silver hair twisted into a knot that looked both careless and immovable. She was 60, though she carried her age like a set of keys she knew how to use. Her face had the mild expression of a woman who rarely interrupted, and therefore heard far more than people meant to say. She looked up when Ethan entered. Then she saw Rusty through the front window of the truck, her hand stilled on the receipt tape. "Is that Walter's dog?" Ethan did not ask how she knew. In a town like Black Pine Ridge, some bonds became public property without ever being discussed. "Found him yesterday," Ethan said. "Bennett Valley Road." Maeve came around from behind the counter and stood near the window. Snowlight drew lines across her face. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. "Rusty." "You heard Walter moved." Everyone had. The words floated around town like smoke from a chimney nobody owned. Maeve folded her arms. "Derek Sloan said Walter had agreed it was time, said the farm was too much, said Rusty was too old for the trip and had gone to a rescue contact." Ethan said nothing. Maeve looked at him then, really looked. "That isn't what happened, is it?" "I don't know what happened, but you know what didn't." It was close enough that Ethan let it stand. Maeve went back behind the counter slowly, as if collecting memory from the aisles. "Walter was in here not 3 weeks ago. Bought oatmeal, batteries, 2 cans of peaches, and the expensive soft food Rusty liked. Told me not to tell Rusty the price, or the dog would develop rich tastes." Despite the weight in the room, Ethan felt the corner of his mouth move. Maeve saw it and almost smiled herself. "He was tired," she continued. "Moving slower, forgot his change on the counter, but he wasn't packing up his life. He asked if I had any of those molasses cookies Marjorie used to buy. Said he wanted to take some up to the South Rise when the snow cleared." "South Rise," Ethan repeated. "Where she's buried." "I heard." Maeve's eyes sharpened gently. "From Naomi?" Ethan gave one small nod. Maeve reached under the counter and pulled out a brown paper bag. She put 2 cans of soft dog food inside without asking. "Walter used to say Rusty had been with him longer than any truck he ever owned and behaved better than most men he knew." She slid the bag across. "He wouldn't leave him." Ethan took the bag. "How much?" Maeve gave him a look so dry it could have salted the road. "If you try to pay me for feeding a 19-year-old dog who got left in a snowstorm, I'll tell the whole town you've gone soft." "That would be inaccurate." "That would be news." For a breath, the humor held. Then Maeve looked toward the window again. Rusty had lifted his head in the truck. His cloudy eyes were fixed down the street, toward the north road. "I don't like tidy stories," Maeve said. Ethan followed her gaze. "No," he said. "Neither do I." He left the market with the paper bag in one hand and a heavier question in the other. He meant to go home. Rusty had been examined, medicated, wrapped, and fed more attention in 4 hours than he probably wanted. The sensible thing was to return to the cabin, lay him by the fire, and start making calls from there. But as Ethan turned the truck toward the southern road, Rusty began to move. It was not dramatic, not at first. A shift of weight. A front paw pressing against the seat, a thin whine threading through the cab. Ethan glanced in the mirror. Rusty was staring at the road ahead. "Settle," Ethan said. The whine grew sharper when they approached the Bennett turnoff. Ethan slowed. Rusty struggled upright, paws slipping on the blanket. His hindquarters trembled, but he pushed his chest against the back of the seat, nose lifted toward the windshield. Another sound came from him, half plea, half command. Ethan pulled onto the shoulder. "Rusty." The dog ignored him. Across the road, the lane to Bennett Farm curved between two snow-buried fence lines and disappeared into a stand of leafless cottonwoods. A new chain hung across the entrance. A metal sign had been wired to the gate. "Property under transfer, no trespassing." The letters were black, clean, and square. Too clean for that old road. Rusty scraped at the door with one paw. "Easy," Ethan said. He stepped out, opened the rear door, and reached in to steady him. Rusty leaned forward so hard Ethan had to catch him before he fell. "You can't walk that," Ethan told him. Rusty did not care. The old dog planted his front paws in the snow and tried to pull toward the gate. His back legs shook violently. Every few steps he had to stop, sides working, breath clouding in short bursts. Ethan held the leash loose but close, ready to lift him the moment he collapsed. They made it only to the gate. Rusty pressed his nose through the lower bars. He inhaled once, again. Then he began to paw at the frozen ground beneath it, weak scratches that barely disturbed the snow. Not panic now. Recognition. Ethan stood beside him, looking through the gate toward the white fields beyond. In the distance, the farmhouse sat low against the rise, its windows dark, chimney cold. A barn leaned behind it. Fence posts marched toward the south slope, where, somewhere under snow and aspen branches, Marjorie Bennett lay beneath the earth Walter had refused to sell. Everything was still. Everything was orderly, new chain, new sign. No tire tracks except one set, half buried under fresh snow. No sound but Rusty's ragged breathing and the faint creak of the gate in the wind. Ethan looked down. Rusty had stopped scratching. He stood with his forehead pressed against the metal, eyes fixed on the farm, as if the house might answer if he waited long enough. A man could leave many things behind, Ethan thought. Tools, furniture, unpaid bills, a broken fence he meant to fix in spring. But not this. Not a dog whose whole body knew the way home. Ethan crouched beside Rusty and placed one hand against the old shepherd's ribs. The heartbeat there was fast, uneven, stubborn. The sign in front of him said the property was under transfer. The dog beside him said something else entirely. Ethan stayed at the gate until Rusty's legs began to give. Then he lifted him carefully, turned back toward the truck, and looked once more at the clean black letters against the snow. Everything about the place looked legal. That was what made it feel wrong. Ethan did not open the gate that afternoon. He stood with Rusty in his arms while the wind moved thin veils of snow across the Bennett lane, and every trained part of him measured distance, locks, sight lines, and consequence. The chain was new. The sign was clear. The road belonged to old memory, but the law belonged to whoever had put black letters on metal. No trespassing. He had ignored worse warnings in worse places, but this was not a battlefield, and Walter Bennett was not a target marked on a map. He was an old man the town believed had chosen to leave. That made the wrongness harder to touch. Rusty trembled against Ethan's coat, not from cold alone. The dog's nose pointed through the bars of the gate, drawing in the scent of home as if scent could become a door if he believed hard enough. His cloudy eyes never left the farmhouse. "Not like this," Ethan said. Rusty gave a thin sound, almost an argument. "I know." Ethan hated the words the moment they left his mouth. Men said "I know" when they did not. They said it to the dying, to widows, to dogs on icy roads. It was a small cup held under a storm. He carried Rusty back to the truck, settled him on the blanket, and drove half a mile beyond the main gate before turning onto an old service pullout near a stand of cottonwoods. From there, the back fence of the Bennett property ran along a drainage ditch, half buried in snow and half collapsed where years of freeze-thaw had lifted the posts. Ethan sat with the engine idling. He told himself he was not trespassing if he stayed outside the fence. Then he saw the shed. It stood beyond the broken section, smaller than the barn, set back near a line of leafless willows. Its side door had not closed properly. The storm had worked one corner loose, and the door breathed open and shut in the wind by a few inches at a time. Rusty saw it too. The old shepherd pushed himself upright with a weak grunt, his front paws sliding on the seat. He did not bark. He did not scratch at the door this time. He simply fixed his gaze on the shed, and the whole tired line of his body changed. Not panic, purpose. Ethan turned off the truck. "This is a bad idea," he said. Rusty looked at him. "Don't give me that." The dog's left ear folded lower. Ethan got out. The cold had sharpened since morning. It bit through the seams of his gloves and made the snow crust crack under his boots. He lifted Rusty carefully and set him down on the packed edge of the ditch, keeping one hand under the dog's chest until Rusty found his balance. The old shepherd's legs quivered, but he leaned forward toward the gap in the fence. Ethan could have carried him. It would have been kinder to the body. But kindness was not always the same as respect. So he let Rusty walk. They went slowly. 10 steps. A stop. Rusty breathing hard, Ethan waiting without pulling. Another 6 steps. The wind moving through the willows like paper being torn somewhere far away. At the broken fence, Ethan stepped over first, then lifted Rusty across with care. The dog gave a low grunt of protest, old pride offended by practical mercy. "File a complaint?" Ethan muttered. Rusty huffed once, as if he might. The shed door tapped softly in the wind. Inside, the air smelled of dust, oil, mouse droppings, old hay, and winter trapped in wood. Ethan stood at the threshold a moment, not touching anything. Light came through the gaps in the boards in pale stripes. A rusted snow shovel leaned near the door. Coils of rope hung from a nail. There were stacked feed bags, a cracked plastic bucket, a rake with 3 missing teeth. Ordinary things. That was what made the first wrong thing stand out. The cane lay near the inner hinge of the door. Dark wood, curved handle, rubber tip split at the bottom. Broken halfway down the shaft, not cleanly, but with a splintered angle as if it had been stepped on or struck hard against something. Ethan crouched, studying it without lifting it. Rusty lowered his head and sniffed. Then the old dog made a sound Ethan had not heard from him before. Not a whine. A small, breathless groan. Ethan looked at him. Rusty's eyes were fixed on the cane. His body had gone still, but not calm. Still the way a man might stand in front of a closed casket. "This was Walter's," Ethan said. Rusty pressed his nose to the handle. Ethan took out his phone and photographed the cane from 3 angles before touching it. Habit, evidence before emotion. He used a clean shop rag from his coat pocket to lift it and set it on an overturned crate. The second wrong thing was on the shelf above the feed bags. An orange prescription bottle half hidden behind a tin of fence staples. Ethan read the label through dust. Bennett, Walter H. Nitroglycerin. Use as directed for chest pain. The bottle was not empty. Ethan's jaw tightened. A man with a bad heart did not leave his emergency medication behind if he was calmly going into care. Not unless someone packed for him badly. Not unless he had no chance to pack at all. Rusty shifted beside him, claws scraping the plank floor. Then he limped toward the back wall. Ethan followed. At first he saw only a row of coats hanging from pegs, stiff with cold and age. Work jackets, a faded rain slicker, a brown canvas coat torn near the lower sleeve. Rusty nosed that one, pushing at it until it swung slightly. A small strip of fabric had caught on a rough nail beside the peg. Ethan leaned closer. Brown canvas, same color as the coat. On the torn edge, something darker had dried into the weave. Not much, not enough for drama, enough for the body to understand before the mind finished. Ethan photographed it, then stepped back. The shed seemed to lose its ordinariness all at once. The shovel, rope, bucket, feed bags. Each object became silent and watchful. A place did not need to be wrecked to speak of violence. Sometimes violence was tidier than people expected. A broken cane, medicine left behind, a sleeve caught on a nail. The kind of evidence a storm could almost erase if no old dog insisted the world look twice. Rusty's legs began to shake harder. Ethan picked him up before pride could object. The dog did not fight this time. He laid his silver muzzle against Ethan's shoulder and released one long, tired breath. Ethan carried him out of the shed and looked back once before pulling the warped door closed as far as it would go. "Whatever happened here," he said quietly, "you saw it." Rusty closed his eyes. That was answer enough. Deputy Lorna Kittredge met Ethan at the sheriff's office an hour later, not because she had nothing else to do, but because he used 3 words on the phone that had weight in any small county. Welfare concern, evidence, elder. The office sat beside the courthouse square, squat and practical, with a flag snapping hard above the steps. Inside, the heat was too high, the coffee too old, and the walls covered in maps, hunting notices, and winter road closure charts. Lorna came out of the back room carrying a file folder and a travel mug. She was 46, compact and strong, with cropped black hair tucked behind one ear, and a face that looked built for weather rather than persuasion. A small bend in her nose suggested an old break. Her eyes went first to Rusty, asleep on the blanket Ethan had laid across 2 chairs, then to Ethan. "You brought the dog into my office," she said. "He's part of the complaint." "He looks more credible than most complainants." "He is." Lorna studied him another second, then motioned toward the side room. "Show me." Ethan handed over his phone and kept his explanation clean. The gate, the broken back fence, the shed door already open, the cane, the medication, the cloth. He did not say what he felt. He did not say Rusty knew. He did not say the place had felt wrong in his bones. Lorna swiped through the photographs without interrupting. That made Ethan respect her more. When she finished, she set the phone down. "You entered the property. The fence was broken. The shed door was open." "That was not my question." "No?" A faint flicker crossed her face. Not approval, not condemnation. A note placed in the right mental box. "You didn't enter the house?" "No." "Didn't remove anything?" "No, photographed only." "Good." She leaned back. "Because the property records show a pending transfer. Walter Bennett signed documents authorizing sale negotiations and care relocation." "You've seen him?" "No." "Has anyone?" Lorna's mouth tightened. "I've seen paperwork." "Paperwork can lie. People lie more often." She picked up the file. "And courts like paperwork better than feelings." Ethan said nothing. Lorna tapped the photo of the prescription bottle on his phone. "This is concerning. The cane, too. The fabric, maybe. But concerning doesn't automatically get me a warrant. especially when the signed documents say the owner relocated voluntarily. Where? That part is less clear. She opened her folder. There's a care coordination note, but no facility name in the copy we have. Just long-term placement arranged. Derek Sloan's office forwarded it when the clerk asked, "Derek Sloan. He's involved in the land transfer. He owns the company whose truck I saw near the road." "You saw a logo in a storm." "Yes." Lorna's gaze sharpened. "Careful, Ward." The warning did not anger him. It steadied him. "I'm being careful." "No, you're being controlled. Those are different things." For a moment, the room held the old heat that lived between people who had seen enough damage to recognize it early. Ethan looked down at his hands. The knuckles were red from cold. The left one bore a thin scar Ranger had once reopened with a tooth during training, years before everything that mattered became memory. Lorna softened by exactly 1 degree. "I'll open a welfare concern. I'll ask for confirmation of Walter Bennett's placement. I'll document the photos. But until I get more, you don't go digging like this alone." Ethan looked up. "You telling me as a deputy, or asking me as a person?" "As both." Rusty stirred in his sleep, a weak twitch passing through his back legs. Lorna glanced over. "That dog came home without the man who owned him." "Yes." "And you think that means the man didn't choose to leave?" "I think it means someone should prove he did." Lorna held his gaze for a long moment, then she nodded once. "I can work with that." By late afternoon, Naomi called Ethan and told him to meet her at the church. "No," Ethan said. It wasn't a question. "I already talked to Lorna." "Good. Now talk to Caleb." Con Naomi. Walter trusted 3 things in this town: Rusty, his wife's grave, and Caleb Morris. You already have one of them in your truck. Then she hung up. Ethan looked at the phone. Rusty, resting in the passenger footwell now because he had refused the back seat on principle, opened one cloudy eye. "She's pushy," Ethan said. Rusty closed the eye again. The church stood on a low hill above town, white clapboard against black pines, with a steeple modest enough not to offend the mountains. Its windows glowed warm in the dimming light. Someone had shoveled the steps clean, though snow had already begun dusting them again. Reverend Caleb Morris opened the door before Ethan knocked. He was 68, tall and lean, with swept-back white hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and a face that had learned patience without becoming soft. He wore a dark cardigan under a worn brown coat, and his eyes went at once to Rusty. "Oh," Caleb said. That was all. He stepped aside. Inside, the church smelled of old wood, candle wax, coffee, and the faint sweetness of hymnals that had absorbed decades of hands. Naomi stood near the front pew with her arms folded, looking as if she had been arguing with God and expected to win on practical grounds. Rusty lifted his head when they entered. The church's warmth seemed to reach him differently from the cabin's fire. His nose moved. Once. Twice. Then he looked toward the left side aisle, where a row of framed photographs hung beside a bulletin board. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. "Walter used to sit there," he said. "Third pew from the back, Rusty under his feet. Marjorie used to say the dog listened better than half the congregation." Ethan carried Rusty to the pew and set him gently on the floor. Rusty lowered himself slowly, nose pressed to the wood near the pew leg. Caleb watched him with grief that did not ask to be noticed. "Walter was frightened," Caleb said. Ethan looked over. The Reverend drew a breath. Not at first. Angry, mostly. Derek kept coming by with papers and promises. Said Walter could move somewhere easier. Said the farm was too much. Said a man alone shouldn't wait for an accident to admit he needed help. Naomi's face changed at that, guilt moving briefly across it. "I told Walter to consider help," she said quietly. "Not sale." Not relocation. Help. Caleb nodded. Derek has a gift for using good words as tools. He walked toward a small office off the side of the sanctuary. Ethan followed, leaving Rusty in Naomi's care. The office was cramped, lined with books, spare candles, donation envelopes, and a coat rack holding 2 scarves and a snow shovel. Caleb opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out a worn Bible with a cracked leather cover. From inside it, he removed a sealed envelope. Ethan saw the name written across the front in shaky block letters. Caleb. The Reverend held it for a moment before handing it over. He gave me this 5 weeks ago, Caleb said. Told me not to open it unless he started agreeing with Derek. That didn't worry you? Caleb closed his eyes briefly. It did, but Walter also laughed after he said it. He told me old age had made him dramatic. Then he forgot where he parked his truck and got so embarrassed he wouldn't look at me. Ethan said nothing. Derek made him doubt himself, Caleb continued. That was the cruel part. Walter knew something was wrong, but he no longer trusted his own knowing. Ethan opened the envelope carefully. The paper inside had been folded twice. The handwriting was uneven, some letters strong, others wandering off as if the hand had tired mid-word. Caleb, if I say I want to sell the farm, ask me about Marjorie's tree. If I say I want to leave, ask me where Rusty will sleep. If I say the dog is too old to come, do not believe that part. I may forget a date. I may forget a name. I may forget why I came into a room. But I have not forgotten the promise I made when Marjorie was lowered into that ground. Rusty stays with me, or I stay where Rusty is. Walter Ethan read it once, then again. The room did not move, but something in it shifted its weight. Outside the office, Rusty gave a soft, strained whine. Naomi murmured to him. The sound traveled through the church like a thread pulled tight from one room to another. Ethan folded the letter with more care than he had used for some medals. This isn't proof of a crime, Caleb said. No, but it is proof of Walter. Ethan looked at him. Caleb's voice was quiet. Sometimes that has to be enough to start with. They returned to the sanctuary. Rusty lay with his head on the old wooden floor, exhausted by the day. Ethan crouched beside him and rested a hand lightly between his shoulders. The dog opened his eyes. For a moment, Ethan saw no mystery in him, no clue, no tool, only a creature too old to fight and too faithful to surrender. He had thought Rusty was leading him toward a secret. Now he understood better. Rusty was holding on to the part of Walter that paper could not sign away. The snow outside began again, soft against the stained glass windows, covering Black Pine Ridge in another layer of white. This time, Ethan did not mistake it for peace. The first lie did not look like a lie. It looked like a signature. Deputy Lorna Kittredge spread the copies across the conference table at the sheriff's office the next morning, weighting the corners with a stapler, a mug, and the heel of her hand. Outside the narrow window, Black Pine Ridge shone under hard winter sunlight. Inside, the room smelled of burnt coffee, copier toner, and the kind of patience required when the law moves slower than fear. Ethan stood rather than sat. Rusty lay on a folded blanket near his boots, exhausted from too many car rides, too many strange rooms, too many memories dragged back into daylight. The old shepherd's eyes were half closed, but whenever someone said Walter's name, his ears moved. Naomi Pierce sat with her clinic folder in front of her. Reverend Caleb Morris had Walter's letter tucked inside his Bible, one hand resting on the cracked leather cover as if the old book and the old letter might steady each other. Lorna tapped the first page. Limited power of attorney, she said. Signed 9 months ago after Walter's cardiac admission in Kalispell. Original scope appears narrow. Bill payment, medical scheduling, basic care coordination. Nothing unusual for an older person with no immediate local family. Who was assigned? Ethan asked. Lorna turned the page. Sloan Ridge Community Assistance, LLC. Naomi gave a short, humorless breath. That sounds invented by a committee trying to pass as kind. It is registered under Derek Sloan's umbrella, Lorna said. Separate from Sloan Ridge Development on paper. Same office address. Same administrative contact. Caleb looked down. He came to the church last year with brochures. Said his company wanted to help seniors stay safe through winter. Did you trust him? Ethan asked. The question came out sharper than he intended. Caleb did not flinch. I wanted to. That answer did more damage than a defense would have. Lorna slid another document forward. 3 months later, there's an amendment. Expanded authority for relocation decisions, sale preparation, and asset management if the principal is deemed unable to safely remain alone. Deemed by who? Naomi asked. A physician's note. Which physician? Dr. Leonard Voss, private consultant out of Helena. I've never seen him treat anyone in this county. Naomi's mouth tightened. I have. Once? He signed off on a boarding facility inspection without stepping into the kennel. Lorna's eyes flicked up. That would have been good to know yesterday. It was 8 years ago, and I did not know it would become a thread in a spiderweb. The room went still after that. Spiderweb was the right word. Ethan could see it now. Not one forged paper slammed onto a desk. Not one villain with muddy boots and a gun. A structure, fine threads, gentle words, senior assistance, care coordination, safety, relocation, sale preparation, a trap that used concern as bait. Lorna turned another page. The amendment was notarized here in town. She did not say the name right away. Ethan watched her face and knew she did not like what came next. Elaine Porter. Caleb shut his eyes. Naomi looked toward the window. Elaine would notarize a pie recipe if someone brought it in a folder. She's not corrupt, Lorna said, but she is careless when someone important is standing over her shoulder. Derek, Ethan said. Lorna nodded once. I called her. She's coming in. Rusty lifted his head as if the air in the room had changed. Elaine Porter arrived 20 minutes later in a camel-colored coat, buttoned crookedly, and boots that had not been meant for ice. She was short, round-shouldered, and breathing hard from the cold, with red-framed glasses low on her nose and a leather handbag clutched in both hands like a shield. Snow crystals clung to the curls around her face. I don't understand why this needed to be official, she said before anyone greeted her. I notarized documents. That is all. Lorna pointed to a chair. Sit down, Elaine. Elaine sat because refusing would have looked worse. Her eyes landed on Ethan first, then Naomi, then Caleb. Last, they dropped to Rusty. Something in her face loosened. Oh, she whispered, that dog. Rusty did not rise. He only watched her through cloudy eyes. Lorna placed the amendment in front of Elaine. Do you remember this signing? Elaine adjusted her glasses. I do many signings. Do you remember Walter Bennett? Elaine's fingers tightened around her purse. Of course I remember Walter. Everyone remembers Walter. That isn't what I asked. The woman's cheeks colored. Ethan expected defensiveness. He got it, but not cleanly. Elaine's first instinct was to protect herself, yet her gaze kept slipping back to Rusty, as if the old dog were a witness no argument could cross-examine. It was at Derek's office, she said. Walter was there. Derek was there. A young man from transport, perhaps. I don't remember his name. Was Walter alert? Elaine opened her mouth. The answer did not come out. Naomi leaned forward, not unkindly. Elaine. He was tired, Elaine said, but tired is not the same as incompetent. No one said it was, Lorna replied. Did he understand what he was signing? Derek explained it. Did Walter? Elaine looked down at the paper. For the first time, the room heard the true machine working inside her. Not evil, but fear grinding against conscience. She had stamped the paper. She had gone home. She had made soup. She had slept. How many ordinary evenings had been built on small failures no one wanted to name? He kept asking where Rusty was, Elaine said. Rusty's head came up fully. Ethan felt it like a hand on his chest. Elaine's voice thinned. Derek said the dog was in the truck. Walter asked twice more. Derek laughed and said old men worry more about dogs than bank accounts. I thought he was being charming. No one spoke. Elaine's eyes filled, but she blinked hard, offended by her own tears. I asked Walter if he was signing voluntarily, she said. He said yes. How did he sound? Caleb asked. Elaine looked at him. Like a man trying to answer a question before someone else answered it for him. The sentence settled over the table. It was not enough to arrest Derek Sloan, not enough to undo the deed, not enough to bring Walter home, but it changed the shape of the room. For the first time, the lie looked less like a signature and more like a hand guided across a page. Lorna took Elaine's statement. Naomi gave Rusty water from a paper cup, cupping her palm beneath his muzzle because his tongue shook when he drank. Caleb stood near the wall, quiet and pale, as if replaying every conversation he had ever had with Walter and finding places where he should have heard more. Ethan stepped into the hall. On the bulletin board outside the conference room was a map of county roads, winter closures marked in red. Beside it hung a notice for the upcoming resort development hearing. A glossy rendering showed skiers smiling beneath blue skies that did not exist in Montana except in brochures. At the bottom, in silver letters, was Derek Sloan's slogan, "A safer, brighter future for Black Pine Ridge." Ethan almost laughed, not because it was funny, because some lies came dressed so well they expected applause. By noon, the names began to appear. Not from nowhere. They had been there all along, tucked into property notices, relocation records, church prayer lists, and the quiet comments people made after funerals and snowstorms. Harold Meacham, 81, sold 40 acres near North Fork after moving closer to medical care. No one in town knew which facility. Doris Whitcomb, 76, widow, transferred her meadow lot to a holding company linked to Sloan Ridge after a fall. Her nephew in Idaho had been told she preferred privacy. Lewis Arbor, 84, former farrier. His cabin changed hands 6 weeks after a care coordinator arranged long-term placement. Each case had paperwork. Each paperwork had soft language. Each soft language had the same clean fingerprints. Sloan Ridge Community Assistance. Caleb stood beside Lorna's desk, reading the name silently. I prayed for Doris 2 winters ago, he said. Her neighbor told me she'd gone to live with cousins. Did she have cousins? Naomi asked. I never checked. He said it without self-defense, and that made it heavier. Maeve Larkin called the sheriff's office after lunch. Then Gideon Hark, the propane delivery driver, stopped in with a receipt book and a troubled face. By mid-afternoon, Black Pine Ridge had become what small towns became when a pattern finally showed itself. Not silent, not honest yet, but restless. People remembered things. A truck parked where it should not have been. A senior assistant's brochure left on a kitchen table. A phone number disconnected too soon. A daughter told not to visit because her aunt was settling in. A man at the post office saying Derek had helped him avoid a family mess. The town had not been blind, Ethan realized. It had been given explanations convenient enough to let busy people move on. That was worse. At 3 o'clock, Lorna received a call from Spokane. She put it on speaker after asking permission. The woman's voice came through tight and cautious, the voice of someone bracing for bad news while trying to sound professional. "This is Evelyn Bennett Cole. I was told you're asking about my Uncle Walter." Ethan looked at Rusty. The dog was asleep, but his paw moved once at the name. Lorna introduced herself and kept the explanation brief. Walter's welfare, land documents, unclear relocation. Rusty found in the storm. There was silence on the line. Then Evelyn said, "Rusty was found where?" "On Bennett Valley Road," Lorna said, "near the turnoff." Another silence. When Evelyn spoke again, the professional shell had cracked. Uncle Walter would never leave that dog. "We've heard that from several people." "No," Evelyn's voice sharpened. "You don't understand. When my Aunt Marjorie died, Walter told me the house had 2 heartbeats left in it, his and Rusty's. He said if one stopped, the other would know first." Naomi looked away. Caleb lowered his head. Ethan stayed very still. Evelyn continued, quieter now. "I haven't been back in years. That's on me. There were family things, stupid things, old grief that turned into pride. But I would have come if someone told me he was being moved." "Derek Sloan's office indicated family had been notified," Lorna said. "I received one email. It said Walter had chosen assisted care and wanted privacy during the transition. It came from a care coordinator, not from Walter. I replied asking where he was. No one answered." "Do you still have it?" "Yes." "Forward it to me." "I will." A breath. Then, "Is he alive?" No one answered quickly enough. Ethan heard the little sound Evelyn made, the one people made when they had asked a question, and the pause had already wounded them. "We are working to confirm his location," Lorna said. "That means you don't know." "It means I won't lie to you." Evelyn exhaled shakily. "I have letters, from Walter, from years ago. He wrote about the farm, about Marjorie's tree, about never selling. Would those help?" "They might." "I'll drive down." "The roads are bad." "He is my uncle," Evelyn said. "The roads can file a complaint." For the first time that day, Lorna almost smiled. After the call ended, the office felt different. Not hopeful. Hope would have been too bright, but the walls no longer seemed to hold only paperwork. Walter had a niece, a history, letters in a box somewhere in Spokane. A life with threads that Derek Sloan had not quite cut cleanly enough. Ethan looked down at Rusty. "You hear that, old man?" he murmured. "You weren't the only one left holding on." Rusty did not open his eyes, but his tail moved once against the blanket. Late afternoon brought the first direct mention of Silver Mercy Home. It came from Lorna's second sweep through the relocation records after Elaine's statement gave her enough reason to request additional documents from the county clerk. Most of the records were bland to the point of insult. Intake pending, private placement, transitional care, family notified. Then Lorna stopped turning pages. Her thumb pressed against one line. "What?" Ethan asked. She did not answer. She read further, then pulled 2 older files from the growing stack. Naomi stood behind her. Caleb moved closer. Lorna laid 3 pages side by side. "Same transport vendor," she said. "Same care coordinator. Same receiving note." Ethan leaned over. Silver Mercy Home. The name appeared in 2 of the older cases. In Walter's file, it appeared only as a partial abbreviation on a transport billing record. SMH, weather delay noted. Lorna typed into her computer, jaw set. "Private long-term care facility," she said after a moment. "Outside the county, near the state line. License active, but barely. 2 complaints last year, both closed as unsubstantiated." "Is Walter listed there?" Caleb asked. Lorna kept typing. Seconds lengthened. Rusty lifted his head slowly, as if the waiting itself had a sound. "No Walter Bennett?" Lorna said. Ethan felt the room drop. Then Lorna's eyes narrowed. "Hold on." She clicked again. "There's a transport entry from 4 days ago. Passenger listed as W. Bennett, 1T, no full first name, destination abbreviated, same billing code." "Bennett with 1T," Naomi said. "A typo," Caleb whispered. "Or a curtain," Ethan said. Lorna printed the page. The machine at the corner of the room hummed, fed paper, and released one thin sheet into the tray. Such a small sound for something that could change the direction of a life. Lorna picked it up and read it again. W. Bennett. One missing letter. That was all it had taken. One missing letter, and Walter Bennett became someone no search would find easily. Not dead, not officially missing, not properly placed. Just blurred at the edge of a system built to trust names only when they were spelled correctly. Ethan looked at the page, then at Rusty. The old dog's eyes were open now, fixed on no one and everyone. For nearly 19 years, Rusty had known exactly who Walter was without a document, without a signature, without a stamped seal or a typed name. The people had needed paperwork. The dog had needed only love. Lorna folded the transport record into a file and reached for the phone. "I'm requesting confirmation from Silver Mercy Home," she said. "And this time, I want a human being on the line." Ethan looked out the window. Beyond the glass, the winter sun was dropping behind Black Pine Ridge, laying gold over the courthouse roof and the snowbanks along the street. The town looked peaceful again, almost innocent. But Ethan knew now that under all that clean snow, the valley was full of footprints. The storm returned before sunset. It came down from the north in long gray walls, swallowing the higher ridges first, then the black pine slopes, then the last clear line of road beyond the courthouse square. By 4 o'clock, Black Pine Ridge had begun closing itself in the way mountain towns learned to do. Shopkeepers dragging sandwich boards inside, snowplows waking like iron beasts, porch lights clicking on early beneath a sky that looked bruised. Deputy Lorna Kittredge stood at the sheriff's office window with the phone pressed to her ear and one hand braced on the sill. "No, I don't want the front desk," she said. "I want someone who can confirm whether a patient is present in the building." She listened. Her jaw hardened. "Yes, I understand privacy laws. I also understand welfare checks, misspelled transport entries, and weather closures. Put me through to a supervisor." At the conference table, Naomi Pierce had Rusty's old medical file open beside a paper cup of coffee gone cold. Caleb Morris sat with Walter's letter tucked into his Bible, his thumb resting against the envelope as though he feared it might vanish if no one held it in place. Ethan stood near the doorway, his coat still on, watching the storm gather in the glass. Rusty slept badly at his feet. The old German shepherd had been carried from truck to clinic, from clinic to sheriff's office, from sheriff's office to church, and back again through too many rooms that smelled of other people's worry. His body was asking for rest. His eyes, when they opened, asked for Walter. Lorna ended the call without saying goodbye. "Silver Mercy says they have no Walter Bennett," she said. Naomi looked up. "Did you ask about W. Bennett?" "I did. They said records are handled by administration and administration leaves at 4. "It is 4:10. "Convenient, isn't it?" Caleb's face had gone very still. "If he is there and they know we're asking—" "They may move him," Ethan finished. No one contradicted him. Outside, snow struck the window hard enough to sound like sand. Lorna reached for the printed transport record again. SMH, weather delay noted. W. Bennett, one missing letter and a whole life blurred by clerical fog. "I can request county assistance," she said, "but roads to the west are already going bad. If we wait on a formal cross-county response, it may be morning." Naomi closed Rusty's file. "Walter may not have morning." Caleb's phone rang then. The sound startled all of them, not because phones did not ring in sheriff's offices, but because this ring came from inside Caleb's coat pocket, thin and ordinary, while everyone was already holding too much silence. He looked at the screen. No caller ID. Lorna held out a hand. Speaker, Caleb answered. For a second there was only static, then wind, then a sound like old heating pipes rattling behind a wall. Hello? Caleb said. A woman's voice came through so softly that Ethan had to step closer to hear it. Reverend Morris? Caleb's eyes changed. Yes. Who is this? The line crackled. I don't have long. They took the desk phone cord again. I'm using mine by the laundry room. Lorna moved to the table and grabbed a notepad. Who is this? Caleb repeated, gentler now. Paula Redmond. I work nights at Silver Mercy. Naomi's chair scraped back. Caleb closed his eyes once, then opened them. Do you know Walter Bennett? The woman on the line breathed shakily. He asked for the dog. Rusty's head lifted. No one moved. He asks every night, Paula whispered. Sometimes he forgets where he is. Sometimes he thinks he's in the barn, but he asks for Rusty. He says they left Rusty in the snow. Ethan felt the room narrow around those words. Lorna leaned in. Ms. Redmond, this is Deputy Kittredge with Black Pine Ridge Sheriff's Office. Is Walter Bennett currently at Silver Mercy home? A pause, then barely audible. Room 12, back hall, listed wrong. Bennett, 1T. They said no visitors. They said family agreed. Who said that? Another crackle, a muffled sound as if Paula had covered the phone. When she came back, her voice was lower. The administrator, and a man from the land company. He was here yesterday. Said Walter may be transferred again before the storm locks the road. Caleb gripped the edge of the table. Paula, Lorna said, calm enough to be useful, are there other residents there whose placement may be questionable? I don't know. The answer came too fast, then broke. I mean, yes, maybe. I don't know what I know anymore. I just pass meds. I keep telling myself that. Naomi's face softened despite the urgency. Paula inhaled unevenly. Walter wouldn't eat tonight. He kept asking if old dogs go to heaven before their people do. I couldn't. The line filled with static. Paula, Caleb said, please check before they move him. A door slammed somewhere on her end. Then the call cut off. For several seconds, the room held only the storm and Rusty's strained breathing. Lorna was already moving. I'm calling County Adult Protective Services, she said. And the state care hotline. I need a welfare emergency documented before we leave. We? Ethan asked. She gave him one flat look. Do not start. Naomi gathered her medical bag. He'll need evaluation before transport. If his heart medication has been mishandled, moving him could be risky. Caleb stood. I'll open the church hall. If there are others, there may not be time to bring everyone tonight, Lorna said. There will be blankets ready anyway. That was Caleb. Not dramatic, not loud. A man setting loaves and lanterns out before the hungry arrived because faith in winter needed logistics. Within 20 minutes, the small rescue effort had a shape. Not perfect, not heroic in any clean storybook way. Lorna had documented the emergency, notified county dispatch, and requested backup from the next jurisdiction. Naomi had enough medication, blankets, and basic equipment to handle an elderly patient in distress until an ambulance could reach them. Caleb had called Maeve Larkin and 2 deacons with 4-wheel drive trucks, asking for cots, soup, and generator fuel. Then Miriam Vale arrived. She came into the sheriff's office with snow on the shoulders of her dark parka and a leather folder tucked under one arm. 63 years old, lean and sharp-eyed, Miriam moved like a woman who had spent decades walking into rooms where people hoped she would be too polite to ask the second question. Her gray hair was braided down her back, and her glasses hung from a cord beaded with tiny blue stones. She worked for County Adult Protective Services, and she had the weary patience of someone who knew that neglect often wore perfume and carried paperwork. "I was 30 miles away when Lorna called," she said, stripping off her gloves. "So someone had better tell me why I'm risking my neck before dinner." Lorna handed her the file. Miriam read fast. Her expression changed only once, at Walter's letter. "That," she said, tapping the page, "is not a legal document." "No," Caleb said, "but it is a human one." She closed the folder. "Good enough to justify my presence for an emergency welfare check when paired with the transport discrepancy and the staff call. We do this clean. We do not threaten. We do not perform outrage. We observe, document, and remove him if there's imminent risk." Ethan nodded. Miriam looked at him. "You armed?" "Yes." "Leave it in the vehicle unless Deputy Kittredge says otherwise. Your grief is not a warrant." The room went quiet. Ethan met her eyes. Then he said, "Understood." That was the first moment, though no one named it, when the mission stopped belonging to Ethan. It became something stronger because it was shared. A deputy, a veterinarian, a county worker, a minister opening his church against the cold, and one old dog sleeping beside a pair of boots as if still waiting for orders from a man no one could find. When Ethan reached the truck, he meant to leave Rusty with Caleb. He truly did. Rusty had no business on an icy road to a questionable care facility in worsening weather. His legs shook when he stood. His heart was old. His body had given more loyalty than any creature should be asked to spend. Ethan opened the passenger door and crouched beside him. "You stay with Caleb," he said. "He'll keep you warm." Rusty stared at him. It was not resistance at first. It was worse, understanding. The old dog pressed his front paws beneath his chest and pushed himself upright. His hind legs trembled. One slipped. Ethan caught him. Rusty leaned against his arm for 1 second, then pulled toward the open truck door. "No." Rusty took another unsteady step. Naomi, standing behind Ethan with her medical bag, said, "He cannot handle this." "I know." "Ethan?" "I know." Rusty's cloudy eyes fixed on him, not pleading now, not confused. There was something almost formal in that gaze, as if the old shepherd were reporting for one last duty and would tolerate no sentimental discharge. Ethan thought of Ranger before a mission, head against his knee, waiting not for permission, but for partnership. He lowered his forehead for a second, not quite touching Rusty's. "You stubborn old king," he whispered. Naomi swore softly under her breath, then opened the back door and rearranged the blankets. "If he comes, he stays warm. He gets carried when I say. If his breathing changes, we turn around." "No," Ethan said. Naomi's eyes flashed. "If Walter is there," Ethan continued quietly, "we don't turn Rusty around before Walter sees him." Naomi looked at the dog. Rusty's tail moved once, not wagging, only answering. "Fine," she said, but the word carried grief more than agreement. "Then we do this carefully." The drive to Silver Mercy home took them west through weather that had stopped pretending to be scenic. Lorna led in the sheriff's SUV, lights off but radio alive. Ethan followed with Naomi beside him, and Rusty bedded in the back, wrapped in blankets until only his silver muzzle and uneven ears showed. Miriam rode with Lorna, calling ahead, leaving messages, documenting times. The world beyond the windshield became a tunnel of snow and headlights. Ethan drove as he had learned to move under pressure. No wasted motion, no drama, attention spread wide and close at once. The road climbed, dipped, then narrowed between walls of pine. In the back, Rusty did not sleep. His nose lifted whenever the truck slowed, as if trying to find Walter through glass, wind, and miles. Silver Mercy Home appeared after the last bend, like a place trying to look kind from too far away. It had once been a roadside motel. Ethan could see it in the long, low shape of the building, the repeated doors, the old parking spaces buried under plowed snow. Someone had painted the exterior a soft cream and put flower boxes under the windows, though in winter they held only dead stems and ice. A sign by the entrance read, "Silver Mercy, Home Compassionate Long-Term Care." One letter in compassionate flickered weakly. No one met them at the door. Lorna knocked once, then again, harder. After nearly a minute, a woman in scrubs opened it on the chain. Thin, dark-haired, with tired eyes and a name badge scratched nearly unreadable. Paula Redmond. She looked at Lorna's badge, then passed her to Miriam, Naomi, and Ethan, standing in the storm with Rusty wrapped in his arms. Her face nearly broke. Then she pulled it back together. "You came," she said. Miriam stepped forward. "County Adult Protective Services. We're here for an emergency welfare check. The administrator is gone. Then you'll help us until he returns." Paula hesitated only long enough to show what fear had cost her. Then she closed the door, slid off the chain, and let them in. Warm air met them, but not comfort. The building smelled of overworked heaters, cheap disinfectant, canned soup, and something sour underneath that had been mopped but not solved. A television murmured in a common room where 3 elderly residents sat beneath thin blankets, watching nothing with the practiced stillness of people who had learned not to ask too often. Naomi's eyes moved over everything: medication cart, locked office door, oxygen tank near the wall, call buttons tied too high on 2 chair backs. Lorna saw it too. Miriam saw more. Her face became very calm, which Ethan understood was not a good sign for whoever had allowed this place to call itself Mercy. "Room 12, Paula said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Rusty stirred in Ethan's arms. Ethan looked down. The dog's nose had lifted. His whole body, weak as it was, had gone alert. Paula led them past the common room and into the back hall. The hallway was colder than the entrance. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A laundry cart sat half full beside a door. Somewhere behind the walls, pipes knocked and rattled. The floor had been polished, but the corners held dust. On one door, a paper snowflake hung crookedly, likely from some holiday activity meant to make loneliness look festive. Rusty began to struggle. "Easy," Ethan whispered. The old shepherd pushed one paw free of the blanket, then another. He did not bark. He did not cry out. He only stretched his neck toward the far end of the hall, nostrils working, breath quickening. Naomi touched his side. His heart's racing. Rusty ignored her. Ethan lowered him carefully to the floor. Naomi made a sharp sound. "Ethan!" "Let him try." Rusty stood for one trembling second, gathered himself, and took a step. Then another. Each step was a negotiation with pain. His rear legs quivered. His nails clicked weakly against the linoleum. Ethan walked bent beside him, one hand hovering under his chest, without taking the dignity of the walk away from him. Naomi stayed close enough to catch him. Paula covered her mouth with one hand and turned her face aside. At room 12, Rusty stopped. The door was half open. Inside, a narrow bed stood against the wall, beneath a window looking out at the blank side of another building. A man lay propped against thin pillows, his face hollowed by illness and confusion, white hair flattened against his scalp. One hand rested on the blanket. The other held nothing, but the fingers moved as if searching for something that should have been there. Walter Bennett looked smaller than the life people had described. But when Rusty stepped into the doorway, something in the old man heard what his eyes had not yet found. Walter turned his head. For a moment he looked through all of them. Then his gaze found the dog. His mouth trembled. "Old boy," he whispered. Rusty moved, not fast, never fast. He crossed the room as if walking through all 19 years at once. Fields, kitchens, spring mud, Marjorie's grave, winter mornings, the truck, the road, the snow. His legs nearly failed halfway. Ethan reached down, but Rusty steadied himself before the hand could lift him. Walter's fingers opened. Rusty reached the bed, lowered his silver muzzle, and placed his head on Walter's knee. No one spoke. Walter's hand came down slowly, shaking so hard it almost missed. Then it settled between Rusty's ears. The old shepherd closed his eyes. Walter bent over him as much as his body allowed, his breath catching in small broken pulls. "I told them," he whispered. "I told them you'd know." Rusty did not wag his tail. He did not need to. His body leaned into Walter's touch, and for the first time since Ethan had found him in the storm, the old dog stopped trying to go somewhere else. The room was still cold. The paperwork was still tangled. Derek Sloan was still somewhere beyond the storm, and Silver Mercy's walls still held more secrets than one night could untangle. But for that moment, none of those things stood at the center. At the center were a man and a dog who had been separated by greed, snow, age, and lies. And against all of it, they had found the same breath again. By the time the first van reached the church, the storm had turned Black Pine Ridge into a town of blurred lights. Snow blew sideways across the hill, erasing tire tracks almost as soon as they appeared. The church windows glowed amber through the white, and the steeple vanished above the roofline as if heaven itself had pulled a wool blanket over the night. Caleb Morris had opened every door he could. The fellowship hall, usually used for potlucks and winter coat drives, had become a shelter in less than an hour. Folding cots lined one wall. Coffee urns hissed on a long table. Blankets were stacked beside hymnals. Someone had brought extra socks, someone else canned peaches, and Maeve Larkin arrived with 2 heavy pots of soup and the expression of a woman who dared grief to complain about her cooking. "No one tells me how many bowls they want," she said, setting the pots down. "They eat until they stop looking like ghosts." No one argued. Gideon Hark, the propane driver, came next, stomping snow from his boots and hauling in a portable generator with the grim dignity of a man delivering a cathedral bell. He was 61, broad through the chest, with a beard gone white at the chin and hands permanently roughened by metal fittings and cold valves. He did not say much. He set the generator near the side entrance, checked the cords twice, and asked Caleb where the oldest people would be sleeping. "Near the interior wall," Caleb said. Gideon nodded. "Good. Wind hits the north windows mean tonight." It was the sort of practical kindness Black Pine Ridge understood best. A sermon made of extension cords and soup. Walter Bennett came in wrapped in 2 blankets, carried on a stretcher by county responders who had finally managed to reach Silver Mercy after Lorna's call. Rusty rode with him, because trying to separate them had proved impossible and unwise. The old German shepherd lay along Walter's side, his silver muzzle resting near the man's wrist, one paw tucked under the blanket, as if he had earned a place there and intended to keep it. Ethan walked beside them through the church doors. The room changed when people saw Walter, not loudly. No one gasped in a way that belonged in a story. The change was smaller and worse. Conversations thinned. A chair scraped. Someone near the coffee table whispered his name, as if testing whether the old man might still fit inside it. Walter Bennett had been part of Black Pine Ridge for decades. He had fixed fence for widows, brought apples to church suppers, sat in the third pew from the back, and shoveled Marjorie's grave path long after his own hands began to shake. Yet for weeks, maybe longer, the town had accepted the idea that he had simply gone somewhere else. Now he had returned, thin, pale, exhausted, with Rusty pressed against him like the last true sentence in a book full of edits. Maeve put one hand over her mouth. Caleb stood near the center aisle, his face stricken but steady. Then he moved. "Bring him here," he said. They set Walter near the far wall where Naomi could work. She moved with quick, controlled precision, checking pulse, medication records, hydration, and the bruised places where neglect had left its quiet fingerprints. Miriam Vale opened her leather folder and began documenting conditions from Silver Mercy. Temperature, medication gaps, resident statements, missing contact logs, inaccessible phones. Lorna Kittredge worked from a small table under a framed church photograph, taking notes, making calls, asking questions in a voice that did not rise, and therefore gave people nowhere to hide from it. Rusty did not move from Walter's side. Even when Naomi adjusted the blanket, even when Maeve brought water, even when another elderly woman from Silver Mercy began crying softly 2 cots away, Rusty stayed where Walter's hand could find him. Walter drifted in and out. Sometimes he seemed to know the room. Sometimes his eyes wandered to the stained glass window above the piano, as if trying to place the colors. But whenever his fingers touched Rusty's head, he returned a little. "Old boy," he murmured once. Rusty closed his eyes. That was when Ethan turned away. Not because the moment was too sentimental. Ethan had little patience for sentimentality. He turned because the sight was too simple. A man, a dog, a hand. It stripped the whole crime down to something no legal phrase could soften. Someone had tried to separate that hand from that head. Across the hall, Caleb stood with Maeve and Gideon, speaking quietly to 3 townspeople who had arrived with blankets. They were not bad people. That was the difficult part. They looked frightened now and ashamed, but not cruel. Their faces said what no one wanted to say aloud. We believed what was easier. A woman named Ruth from the pharmacy brought a box of pill organizers and kept wiping the same spot on the table. A retired carpenter named Paul Askew asked whether anyone needed ramps repaired. 2 deacons who had once praised Derek Sloane's vision carried cots without meeting each other's eyes. The town was not celebrating a rescue. It was learning the weight of what it had failed to notice. Near midnight, Walter became clear enough to give a statement. Naomi did not like it. 5 minutes, she said. Lorna nodded. 5. Walter lay propped under blankets, face hollow beneath the church light. Evelyn Bennett Cole had arrived 30 minutes earlier, pale from the drive, hair damp with melted snow, clutching a tin box of old letters against her chest. When she first saw her uncle, guilt crossed her face with such force that Ethan thought she might drop the box. Walter looked at her for a long time. "Evie?" he said. The name seemed to undo her. She came to his side, took his hand, and whispered something too private for the room. Rusty lifted his head, considered her, then allowed her presence with the grave generosity of an old monarch permitting a late apology to enter the court. Lorna sat near Walter with her notebook. "Mr. Bennett," she said gently, "I need to ask about the night you left the farm." Walter's gaze drifted toward the ceiling. "I didn't leave." Evelyn closed her eyes. Lorna waited. Walter swallowed. Naomi held a cup to his mouth. He drank a little, then turned his fingers into Rusty's fur. "Derek said the farm was killing me," he said. "Said Marjorie wouldn't want me dying in the snow. Said Rusty was suffering because I was too selfish to let go." His voice shook, but anger lived under the weakness. "He said old dogs don't know mercy. Said men do." Rusty's ear flicked. Ethan's hand tightened against the back of a chair. Walter continued in pieces. Derek's visits, the papers. The bills laid out like threats. The careful way Derek used Evelyn's absence, Walter's heart condition, and the small failures of memory as proof that Walter could not trust himself. How Derek always spoke softly when others were listening. How he spoke differently when they were alone. "He told me if I fought it, they'd say I was incompetent," Walter whispered. "Then Rusty would go to a shelter, or worse. He said I should be grateful he was arranging things." Caleb bowed his head. Miriam wrote without looking up. Her jaw was set so tight that a muscle jumped near her temple. "The night of the storm," Lorna said. "Who transported you?" Walter's eyes closed. For a moment, Ethan thought he had slipped away again. Then Walter said, "Mason." The name struck Lorna like a nail finding wood. "Mason Greer?" Walter nodded faintly. "Derek's driver, not always his driver, but his when money needed quiet." Rusty stirred. Walter's fingers tightened in his fur. "Mason put me in the truck. I told him Rusty comes. I told him he'd never ridden without me. Rusty tried to climb up. He couldn't. His back legs—" Walter's voice broke. Mason shut the door. The room had gone silent. No one drank coffee. No one moved a chair. Even the old pipes seemed to hold their breath. "Then what?" Lorna asked. Walter looked toward Rusty. "I heard him crying." Evelyn covered her mouth. Walter whispered, "I heard him until I couldn't." That was the sound the whole chapter had been moving toward, though none of them knew it until it arrived. Not Derek's name, not the paperwork, not the facility. A man in a truck hearing the dog he loved crying behind him and being too trapped in weakness to open the door. Rusty pushed his muzzle under Walter's hand. Walter bent over him, shaking. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry, old boy." Rusty did not understand the words, perhaps, or perhaps he understood everything that mattered beneath them. His tail moved once against the blanket. That single motion did more to the room than shouting could have. Mason Greer was brought in just after 1 in the morning. He had not been arrested yet. Lorna called it an interview. Ethan called it mercy that Lorna got to him first. Mason entered the church through the side door with his cap twisted in both hands. He was 45, broad but softened by bad sleep and worse choices, with a beard shaved unevenly and eyes that went everywhere except where Walter lay. Snow melted off his work jacket onto the floor. When he saw Rusty, he stopped. The old dog lifted his head. Mason looked as if something inside him had been waiting to be judged by that exact face. Lorna led him to the corner near the kitchen, but voices carried in a church hall, no matter how people tried to lower them. At first, Mason gave the small answers of a man clinging to the last splinters of denial. He was hired for transport. He did not handle paperwork. He thought Walter had agreed. Derek said the dog was going elsewhere. Then Rusty gave one low sound from Walter's cot. Not a growl, barely even a whine. Mason's face folded. "He told me not to bring the dog," Mason said. Lorna did not speak. Derek said the facility wouldn't take him. Said a 19-year-old dog would die in the van anyway. Said leaving him near the road was kinder than taking him to animal control. Mason pressed the cap between both hands until the brim bent. "I didn't leave him in the middle of nowhere. I thought maybe someone would find him." Ethan stepped forward once. Naomi touched his arm, not to stop him by force, to remind him that violence would only make the truth smaller. Mason saw the movement and flinched. "I heard him," he said. "After I pulled away, I heard that dog trying to follow. I kept driving because Derek was on the phone telling me to keep driving." "Cash payments?" Lorna asked. Mason nodded. "Other transports?" Another nod. He started to cry then, ugly and tired. Not enough to cleanse him. Enough to make him useful. He gave names, dates, drop-off records. The routes used when families might ask questions. The phrase Derek preferred, temporary stabilization. By 2 in the morning, Elaine Porter had arrived with her notary log wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. She looked smaller than she had at the sheriff's office, the red frames of her glasses bright against a face drained nearly gray. "I found the time entries," she told Lorna. "I wrote them wrong in the official copy because Derek's assistant said the first appointment had been rescheduled. But my personal log has the original time. Walter signed after office hours. Derek said it was urgent." She looked at Walter and Rusty, then at Caleb. "I should have asked him alone," she said. "I knew that. I knew it then." Caleb did not absolve her. That would have been too easy. He only said, "Then help now." Elaine nodded and handed over the log. Evelyn opened her tin box at the same table. Inside were letters from Walter, old photographs of Marjorie under the aspen, and one picture of Rusty as a younger dog standing beside Walter's boot, ears high, coat bright, eyes fixed on his person. Ethan stared at that photograph longer than he meant to. Rusty had been magnificent once, not because age had ruined him. Age had revealed what remained after strength left. Near 3, Derek Sloan came to the church. Of course he did. Men like Derek disliked rooms where their names were spoken without them present. He entered through the front doors, wearing a dark overcoat dusted with snow and an expression of grave concern polished for witnesses. His hair was immaculate despite the storm. His gloves were leather. His voice carried warmth the way a stage lamp carried sunlight. "Deputy Kittredge," he said, looking around at the cots, blankets, residents, files, and faces no longer arranged in his favor. "I heard there had been some confusion. I came as soon as roads allowed." No one thanked him. That was the first wound. Derek's eyes moved to Walter, then Rusty, then Mason in the corner, red-eyed and hollowed out. His smile adjusted by a fraction. "This is an unfortunate misunderstanding," he continued. "Care transitions can be emotional, especially when pets are involved. I have always acted in Mr. Bennett's best interest and in the interest of responsible development for—" "Stop," Walter said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. Derek paused, more irritated than surprised. Walter lifted one trembling hand and placed it on Rusty's head. "You don't get to say his name like that," Walter whispered. The room changed again. Derek looked around for the old arrangement. Nods, polite smiles, someone to laugh awkwardly and ease the tension. He found none. Maeve stood with a ladle in one hand like a farm wife version of Judgment Day. Gideon leaned beside the generator with arms crossed. Elaine looked down but did not hide. Evelyn stood behind Walter's cot with Marjorie's letters in her hand. Lorna stepped forward. "Mr. Sloan, I'll need you to remain available for formal questioning." "I have attorneys?" "I assumed." Miriam appeared beside Lorna. "And I have reports going to Adult Protective Services, the State Licensing Board, and the County Attorney before sunrise." Naomi lifted Walter's medication record. "I have medical discrepancies." Elaine raised her notary log, voice shaking but audible. "I have corrected entries." Mason stared at the floor. "I have payment records." Evelyn held up the letters. "And I have family documentation showing my uncle never consented to this." Derek's smile did not vanish. It died in place. There was no shouting, no dramatic confession, no fist through a table. Just the sound of ordinary people finally refusing to give him the room. For the first time, Derek Sloan looked less like the future of Black Pine Ridge and more like a man standing too long under light. Lorna escorted him toward the side office for questioning, and the fellowship hall slowly began breathing again. Near dawn, Walter was stable enough to sleep. Rusty slept too, his head still on Walter's blanket, one paw touching the old man's wrist. Snow continued tapping the windows, softer now, as if even the storm had grown tired. Ethan stood near the glass and watched the world outside turn from black to blue. Walter's voice came from behind him. "Mr. Ward." Ethan turned. Walter's eyes were open, clearer than before, though rimmed with exhaustion. "Ethan," he said. Walter nodded slightly, accepting the correction. "I can't go back alone." Rusty lifted his head at the sound of the word back. Walter saw it and tried to smile. It broke halfway. "I want to," he said. "Lord knows I want to. Marjorie's there, my fields, the South Rise." His fingers moved weakly over Rusty's fur. But wanting a thing doesn't make a body able to hold it. Ethan said nothing. He knew the shape of that truth too well. Walter looked toward the windows where dawn had begun turning the snow silver under the church lights. Don't let them put me somewhere that smells like bleach and forgetting. The sentence entered Ethan quietly and did not leave. He looked at Rusty. The old dog watched him with tired eyes, as if prepared to argue with heaven itself if necessary. Ethan turned back to the window. Saving a man, he realized, did not always mean returning him to the exact place he had been taken from. Sometimes the old home could be honored without asking old bones to defend it alone. Sometimes rescue was not a road backward. Sometimes it was building a new door wide enough for memory to enter. Outside, Black Pine Ridge lay buried under snow. Inside, under the church roof, the truth had begun to thaw. After the storm, Black Pine Ridge entered one of those winter mornings that seemed almost apologetic. The sky opened blue and sharp above the mountains. Snow lay over the town in clean folds, bright enough to hurt the eyes. The pines stood black and silver along the ridges, and every roof sent up a small breath of steam as the sun touched it. From a distance, the valley looked innocent again. But innocence, Ethan Ward had learned, was sometimes only weather. The investigation did not end with Derek Sloan standing under the church lights. It widened. Quietly at first, then with the heavy machinery of county offices, state inspectors, licensing boards, property attorneys, and bank records. Sloan Ridge Development became a name people said differently. Silver Mercy Home was no longer a vague place beyond the county line, but a file box full of questions, complaints, missing calls, and residents whose lives had been reduced to billing codes. Derek's lawyers arrived before the second plow cleared the courthouse lot. They spoke in polished statements about misunderstandings, transition stress, clerical mistakes, and the hazards of rural care. But Walter Bennett's letter existed. Elaine Porter's corrected log existed. Mason Greer's payment records existed. Evelyn Bennett, Cole's old letters existed. Naomi's medical notes existed. Miriam Vale's report existed. And Rusty existed. No attorney knew what to do with a 19-year-old German shepherd who had chased a truck through snow because paper had lied and love had not. Walter spent 3 days under medical observation after the night at the church. Not in Silver Mercy, not anywhere that smelled of bleach and forgetting. Naomi helped arrange a temporary room in the small recovery wing attached to the clinic, where Maeve brought soup in jars. Caleb read quietly from the Psalms when Walter asked, and from old fishing magazines when he did not. And Evelyn sat beside the bed with the tin box of letters open on her lap. Evelyn did not ask forgiveness all at once. That would have been too easy, and Walter was too tired for ceremonies. She came in each morning with coffee. She forgot to drink, sat near the window, and read pieces of Marjorie's old letters aloud until Walter smiled at the right places. Sometimes he remembered the story behind a line. Sometimes he did not. Sometimes he called Evelyn by her mother's name, and she took the wound without correcting him too quickly. Rusty slept wherever Walter was. Naomi complained about infection control, clinic policy, dog hair, and common sense, then put an extra blanket on the floor beside Walter's bed and told everyone not to trip over the patient's emotional supervisor. Rusty accepted the title with the indifference of royalty. Ethan came every day. At first, he stood near the door, then nearer the bed. Then, one afternoon, Walter pointed at the empty chair and said, "A man hovering that much ought to either sit down or become a ghost." So Ethan sat. It was not a dramatic healing. No music swelled. No old wounds snapped shut. Mostly he sat while Walter slept, and Rusty snored in thin, rattling breaths. He fixed a loose cabinet handle in Naomi's clinic hallway because his hands needed work. He shoveled the back steps without being asked. He drove Evelyn to the Bennett farm once so she could stand beneath Marjorie's aspen and cry where no one in town could watch. The farm itself became a legal knot, but not an impossible one. With Miriam's help, Evelyn contacted an attorney from the next county, a soft-spoken woman named Helen Rourke, who wore muddy boots with her suit and had little patience for men who hid theft inside paperwork. Helen found errors. More than errors, she found patterns. The expanded power of attorney had been filed too quickly, witnessed poorly, and used in ways the original document had never intended. The transfer was frozen. Derek's winter resort deal began to crack, not all at once. Greed rarely fell like a barn in a storm. It leaned first, creaked, lost investors, drew inspectors, forced men in expensive coats to explain why their beautiful maps required the quiet removal of old people from land they had loved longer than the investors had been alive. The Bennett farm would not become a resort road. Eventually, with Evelyn's consent and Walter's clearer signatures on better days, the land was placed into a small local conservation trust. The south rise, where Marjorie rested beneath the quaking aspen, would remain untouched. The farmhouse would be preserved. The lower field would be leased to a young couple from the valley who wanted to keep hay and sheep on it, not condos. Walter listened to the plan from the clinic bed, Rusty's head under his hand. "And the fence line?" he asked. "We'll keep the fence line," Evelyn said. "The west gate sticks." "I know." "No, you don't. It sticks like a mule with a law degree." Ethan looked out the window so no one would see him smile. Walter did not go back to live there. That decision cost him more than any signature. The morning he accepted it, the room was quiet except for Rusty's breathing and the ticking of Naomi's wall clock. Snowmelt dripped from the eaves outside. Walter stared at his hands for a long time, the skin thin over the bones, the fingers that had fixed posts, held reins, planted seed, buried his wife, and stroked one dog's head for nearly 19 years. "I can love a place," he said, "and still not be strong enough to survive it." Evelyn turned her face away. Ethan did not. He knew that sentence, not the words, but the country they came from. "I've got the old guest shed," Ethan said. Walter looked at him. "It's attached to the cabin by the covered walkway. Used to store tools and fishing gear. Roof sound. Stovepipe's good. Needs insulation, railing, wider door, maybe a window that doesn't look like a prison slot." Walter studied him with pale, tired eyes. "You offering me a shed, Ward?" "I'm offering Rusty a place where he doesn't have to choose between us." Rusty opened one eye at his name, then closed it again. Walter gave a breath that might have been a laugh if his body had more strength to spare. "You always this sentimental?" "No." "Good. I'd hate to move in with a liar." It took 12 days to make the shed into a room. Not because Ethan could not work faster, but because Black Pine Ridge kept arriving. Paul Askew, the retired carpenter, came with a truck full of lumber and the solemn claim that he happened to have extra railing. Gideon Hark inspected the propane line and muttered darkly about people who installed fittings without respect for mortality. Maeve brought food no one had asked for and left it in the kitchen like a benevolent burglar. Caleb hung curtains Evelyn found in storage. Naomi approved the floor plan only after measuring the distance between the bed and the door, the bed and the heater, the bed and Rusty's blanket. Lorna installed a motion light by the walkway. When Ethan raised an eyebrow, she said, "Don't argue with a woman carrying a drill in municipal authority." He did not. The room became warm in pieces, a bed with a firm mattress, a chair facing the window, shelves for books and pill organizers, a framed photograph of Marjorie beneath the aspen, a hook for Walter's coat. A low bed for Rusty, though everyone knew Rusty would sleep wherever Walter's hand could reach. The first night Walter stayed there, Ethan lay awake in his own room listening. He heard the wind beyond the cabin wall, the stove settling. the old house learning another rhythm. Then, faintly, Walter coughed. Ethan was out of bed before thought caught up. He stopped in the hallway. Through the half-open door of the new room, he saw Walter asleep, one hand dangling over the side of the bed. Rusty lay beneath it, silver muzzle on Ethan's old wool blanket, eyes open and calm. The dog looked toward Ethan once. Not worried, not searching, just aware. Ethan stood there in the dark with one hand on the doorframe. For years his cabin had been arranged around absence. Elise's garden cans empty under the porch, Ranger's old tag hidden in a drawer, one chair by the fire, one mug in the sink, one set of boot prints coming and going. Now there was a second lamp burning down the hall. A man could mistake that for burden if he had spent long enough being afraid of being needed. Rusty sighed, closed his eyes, and stayed. By the end of February, Black Pine Ridge had changed in ways too small for newspapers and too important to ignore. A list appeared on the church bulletin board. Not a charity drive, not a memorial, a schedule. 19 Winter's Watch. Caleb wrote the name in neat black letters after Maeve rejected 3 others for sounding like a committee trying to win a grant. The idea was simple enough that no one could admire it from a distance and do nothing. Volunteers would check on older residents during winter, not once, not when convenient, regularly, driveways, medication, heat, groceries, phone calls, coffee if wanted, silence if needed, a human being at the door saying a name out loud. Miriam helped make the forms practical. Lorna made sure privacy and safety were respected. Naomi added a section for pets because, as she told the first meeting, sometimes the dog will tell you the truth before the person does. Rusty became the honorary founder. He did not deserve the administrative burden. At the first meeting, he lay under the table in the church hall while people discussed route maps, check-in times, emergency contacts, and who had a vehicle that could handle the North Road after a drift. Maeve slipped him a biscuit. Naomi saw and pretended not to. Walter sat in a wheelchair near the coffee urn, a blanket over his knees, one hand resting where Rusty could nose it when necessary. Ethan stood in the back because old habits died like old roots. Then Walter looked over and said, "Don't stand there like a fence post. You're on the Tuesday route." "I am? You've got the truck." "I wasn't consulted." "You were breathing? That counts?" The room laughed, not at Ethan exactly. With him, maybe. Around him. Near enough that he did not know what to do with it. Rusty, awakened by the laughter or offended by the interruption of biscuit digestion, let out a long, rattling snore under the table. Walter laughed then. A real laugh. Thin, surprised, but real. It moved through the hall like sunlight hitting ice. Ethan looked at him, then at Rusty, then at the people gathered around folding tables with pencils and maps and imperfect courage. Something eased inside him, not healed, not erased, but given room. Maybe that was all healing ever did at first. It made room. Winter softened slowly. The days grew longer. Snow slid from roofs in heavy sheets. The road to the Bennett farm cleared enough for Walter to visit the South Rise on a bright morning in March. Ethan drove. Evelyn came along with flowers wrapped in brown paper. Rusty rode in the back seat on a nest of blankets, his eyes half closed, his body frail but peaceful. At Marjorie's aspen, Walter did not say much. He touched the bark. Evelyn placed the flowers. Ethan stood a respectful distance away, hands in his coat pockets, wind moving his longer hair across his forehead. Rusty lay in the snow beside the fence, wrapped in a blanket Naomi had insisted on sending. He lifted his head once toward the field, then toward Walter, then settled again. He had no need to search now. Everyone he loved was accounted for. By early spring, the snow around Ethan's cabin began to shrink back from the porch steps. Brown earth showed in patches beneath the pines. Water ran in thin silver threads along the ditch. The air still held cold, but beneath it was the first shy smell of thaw. Rusty grew weaker. No one said it in grand ways. They adjusted. Naomi changed medication. Walter rested his hand more often on Rusty's ribs to feel the rise and fall. Ethan built a small ramp to the porch, then a lower one near the fire, then finally stopped pretending Rusty used either without being carried. The old shepherd accepted help with offended dignity. He still lifted his head when trucks passed, but he no longer tried to rise in panic. He would listen, decide Walter was near, decide Ethan was near, and lower his muzzle back to the blanket. That was peace, Ethan thought, not the absence of old fear, the knowledge that it no longer had the final word. One evening, when the last light of the day turned the cabin windows gold, Walter sat near the fire with a quilt over his knees. Ethan knelt by the hearth, placing another split log onto the coals. Rusty lay between them, stretched on his side, silver muzzle pointed toward the warmth. On the small table beside Walter sat Rusty's old collar. Ethan had cleaned the leather carefully, not enough to make it new. New would have been disrespectful. He had only wiped away the road grime, softened the cracked edges with oil, and polished the metal plate until the engraving caught the firelight again. Rusty, 19 years together. Walter reached for it with trembling fingers. "Marjorie had that made after he chewed through his third collar," he said. "Told me if the dog was going to keep choosing us, the least we could do was label the miracle properly." Ethan smiled faintly. "She sounds like she had sense. She married me, so the record is mixed." The humor rested there, gentle and human. For a while they listened to the fire. Then Walter said, "You know, I thought I wanted my old house back." Ethan looked over. "I still do some days," Walter continued. "I miss the sound of that kitchen floor. I miss the west gate sticking. I miss Marjorie yelling at the stove like it owed her money." His hand settled on Rusty's side. "But this place has a good sound, too." The cabin held its breath around the words. Ethan placed the poker beside the hearth. "What sound?" So, Walter looked toward the hallway, the second lamp burning in the room Ethan had built, the kettle beginning to murmur on the stove, Rusty breathing slow between them. "People staying," he said. Ethan did not answer. He could not right away. Outside, the last snow on the porch roof began to drip in steady drops. Inside, the fire worked patiently at the wood. Rusty slept between two old men the world had nearly taught to disappear in different ways. The collar on the table caught the light. Once those words had looked like an epitaph for a promise betrayed. Now they looked more like a lamp, 19 years together. Not long enough to stop loss. Long enough to teach a town what loyalty looked like when it refused to die quietly in the snow. And somewhere beyond the cabin, across the thawing valley, porch lights began coming on, one by one, as volunteers made their evening rounds, knocking on doors, checking medicine, clearing steps, calling names into warm rooms so no one would have to wonder whether they had been forgotten. Rusty slept through all of it. He had done his part. At the end of Black Pine Ridge, beneath the pines, Ethan Ward's cabin glowed with one more light than it used to. And for the first time in years, it looked less like a place built to survive the winter than a place willing to welcome spring. Sometimes the ones who seem too old, too tired, or too quiet to matter are carrying the truth everyone else has overlooked. Rusty did not save a town with strength. He saved it by remembering love when people had forgotten their duty. And maybe that is one of God's gentlest miracles, not a thunderbolt from the sky, but an old dog refusing to let a promise die in the snow. So tonight, may we notice the people who have grown quiet. May we knock on one more door, make one more call, and remember that no one should have to disappear before they are missed. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe stories like this still matter, please like and subscribe. May peace find your home, and may no one you love feel forgotten.